The story of Portrait of Dr Gachet begins in 1890. One of Vincent van Gogh's last pieces of work, it serves as a still capture of the encapsulating melancholy associated with sickness, age, and an inescapable reality of human life.
Vincent van Gogh was born on March 30th, 1853 in the south of the Netherlands near the Belgian border. He received an excellent secondary education which opened him up to different fields and an overall interest in the arts and sciences. He also found interest in language, specifically French and English. In 1869, Van Gogh began an apprenticeship at the UCO, an art gallery originally owned by his uncle, Sim van Gogh. The gallery thrived with the movement of various pieces by then famous artists who specialized in contemporary art. Van Gogh felt drawn to the innovative pieces made by the members of the Barbizon school, specifically Charles Francis Bourbon, Theodore Rousseau, and Constant Troyon. These artists attempted to create pieces that encapsulated the natural world with melancholy, elegance, and gloomy grandeur, as praised by critic Jules Casnardi. As a young art student and attempting to construct a style, Van Gogh gravitated towards these early expressionists. He felt a magnetic gravitation in works that were sensitive and empathetic in nature. Referring to their work, he wrote to his brother Theo, "That's magnificent, that's poetry." Gogh, originally hard-working, was at first in charge of selling photographs at the UCO. However, he began to grow hostile and anxious on his work, and later was fired at the age of 23.
Upon the loss of his job, Gogh began to take an interest in religion and was determined to help his father in church. After working in many crafts and finding himself stuck, he found himself being drawn back to art. In October of 1880, he made the decision to become an artist and enroll in the Académie des Beaux-Arts in Brussels. His early pieces were found to be dark and brooding, with metaphorical intent in describing the exaggerations of the world.
Van Gogh was incredibly close with his brother Theo and turned to him often. In 1886, he first encountered with Impressionists, which would influence his style for the rest of his life. The group included excellent artists such as Degas and Monet. They documented the unbalanced, unstable, and mimicked real life with swift brushstrokes and intricate style. Though the stress of the art scene of Paris, the group encountered problems and strife, leaving Van Gogh with stress and influencing his mental anguish. Van Gogh painted in spite of his pain and chose his subjects carefully. He was seen by others as a symbolist, leaving a clear message through every piece of imagery he created. Van Gogh used color and shape to intricately weave emotions through his works and depicted these feelings in an incredible style, even if perceived as a dream or fantasy. As his health declined, his works became more impressionistic and bold. After his fourth panic attack, Gogh suggested he should stay with Camille Pissarro, and Pissarro turned him to advise with Paul Ferdinand Gachet, who lived in Arvois and had consulted with struggling artists before. This man would serve as one of the last subjects before Van Gogh's suicide.
Van Gogh can be quoted saying, "I have seen Dr. Gachet, who gives me the impression of being rather eccentric, but his experience as a doctor must keep him balanced enough to combat the nervous trouble from which he certainly seems to be suffering at least as seriously as I." This quote encapsulates why Gogh chose Gachet as his subject. The connection between the two men was unnatural and painful. Gogh saw his doctor as being sicker than he was, despite his credentials. It is unclear if this was all Van Gogh's disillusion with the world, or if he truly saw something that others did not. He believed that Gachet could not cure him and wasn't in touch with 19th century medicine. But Van Gogh's melancholy and fears blinded him to the fact that what he suffered from was incurable by any pill.
Van Gogh's painting style was unique from any other. He used restless brushstrokes to create precise details for Dr. Gachet's melancholy expression. Van Gogh writes to his brother Theo explaining the piece. "I've done the portrait of Dr. Gachet with a melancholy expression, which might well seem like a grimace to those who see it. Sad but gentle, yet clear and intelligent, that is how many portraits ought to be done. There are modern heads that may be looked at for a long time, and that may perhaps be looked back on with a longing 100 years later."
Van Gogh suffered from many mental breakdowns in the final years of his lifetime. He was eventually sent to a mental hospital in Arles and was treated by an assistant physician by the name of Dr. Felix Ray. The first breakdown he suffered through led Vincent to cut off his left ear on December 23, 1888. After detaching his ear, Van Gogh sent the ear to a prostitute named Rachel as a token of affection. Ray predicted that Van Gogh was sick and began having seizures because he drank too much caffeine and alcohol. He believed that the overdose of both stimulants led to his insanity and poor health. Felix Ray wrote to Theo, Van Gogh's brother, to inform him of his sickness. He stated, "When I tried to get him to talk about the motive that drove him to cut off his ear, he replied that it was a purely personal matter." Theo received this news and was worried about Van Gogh's behavior. After 2 weeks of rehab, Gogh returned home and began the recovery process. On the 29th of July, Van Gogh committed suicide due to his mental illness.
Despair of Gogh's suicide made Theo reluctant to collect his brother's paintings. There were over 600. Van Gogh's suicide stunned everyone close to him. Through this pain, Theo asked an impressionist art dealer, Paul Rule, if it was possible to hold an exhibition of his brother's work. Portrait of Gachet was assigned 251. Theo was not alone in hoping for the remembrance of Van Gogh's life work. In 1891, many artists assisted in the organization of a memorial exhibition held in Paris, which featured Van Gogh's work. Although his work was heavily acclaimed by the art community, none of his canvases sold. After the passing of Theo Van Gogh, a halt was put on the future prospects of Van Gogh's canvases, and the collection stayed locked away for the time being.
After Theo's death, Van Gogh's paintings fell into the hands of Theo's widowed wife, Joanna. She did not share the same love for avant-garde art that her late husband Theo did. However, she wrote in her diary that the care for her child was not the only job Theo left her. It was also to care for, protect, and share Vincent's work. In 1891, 270 paintings were donated to Amsterdam, including the Portrait of Dr Gachet. Critics followed the artwork to the Free Exhibition Gallery in Copenhagen and singled out Portrait of Gachet as a symbolist portrait, in which instead of copying the appearance of his subject, the artist used it to convey an idea. This painting has such a cultural ethos even in the world today, because each brushstroke used to create every brow hair, facial line, and Gachet's hunched posture is delicately done, representing the baggage and weight we carry through the natural world in physical form.
Through deaths in time, the painting moved through exhibitions in Northern Europe. In October 1904, Mogens Ballin, the painting's owner, sent the portrait to where he thought it would sell. The city was Berlin. The painting ended up in Eugene Druitt's hand in 1910 for a Van Gogh exhibition. The painting was quickly rising in price and value and gained more attention. By the end of World War I, the portrait was in the possession of Doris Wozinski, the son of a Jewish merchant. As Germany's unemployment rate rose, the Nazi Party began to take shape. Party members would slander expressionists by juxtaposing with deformed faces. Van Gogh's pieces were among those under fire. In 1933, Swarovski, terrified, hid the portrait as well as other expressionist works in the Stadtholder's roof. Despite pressures as a targeted man, Swarovski refused to leave his post at the Stadel in the country he loved. Some Nazi leaders protested its seizure, but ultimately the portrait was in an empty room for storage until the Nazis stole the artwork from the gallery and labeled it as degenerate art. During his reign of terror, Hitler created degenerate art shows to make a mockery of expressionist work, such as Van Gogh's. The portrait's dark, melancholic tone accurately mirrored Germany at the time. Hitler despised the use of modernism in art and work that was abstract and expressive. This hatred was due to the individuality and the freedom of thought that was added. He feared that this act of expression would disrupt the regime he planned to create. The artwork fell into one of the hands of the most powerful Nazi officers, Erming Göring. Erming Göring advocated for the disposal of the piece, writing to a Berlin antiques dealer that the piece is decidedly degenerate. He then sold it to Franz Koenings, a wealthy banker in Paris. In 1940, the painting was then shipped to New York, and Siegfried Kromsky took ownership. It was in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where the painting stayed for short periods of time, until 1990, when the family sent shockwaves to the art community by deciding to sell. Ryoto Saito, a businessman from Japan, then bought the famous work for $82.5 million, the most expensive painting ever sold at the time. After his death, it was sold privately, and for years it was feared that the painting was cremated with his body. The Metropolitan Museum held its breath for years until it finally came out to the public The painting had been sold to Austrian fund manager Wolfgang Flotti.
Portrait of Gachet has been around the world and in many different hands. However, it should be returned to a public museum in Northern Europe for viewing. Van Gogh's legacy must be preserved, and this painting has an incredible significance to not only individuals that it touched, but to the era the monument's men fought to preserve and protect. Gachet's lifelike expressions, married with Van Gogh's intricate and expressionist style, do no service stored in a private space. While it was legally in the ownership of Theo Van Gogh's wife, she sold it because she knew that Van Gogh's work was meant to be seen. As his family passed on, it is even more clear that Gachet did not have a place with one specific person or loved one. Portrait of Gachet is a masterpiece that serves as an encapsulation of the wear that time and healing takes on the human form, and will serve the public better in a museum for people from all walks of life to see.